Many of us are fascinated by the idea of life out there amongst the stars.
Over the years, we've watched in awe as each new astronomical discovery has been announced.
And each time startling new evidence has emerged, the BBC has been there to report on it.
In this special programme, we'll be looking at how that story's been reported over decades.
So, join us as we seek out little green men amongst the stars.
It's our remarkable good fortune to be alive at a time when such experiments are possible.
In our distant past,
this planet has been visited by beings from outer space several times in antiquity.
And even in our own backyard.
Caught it.
a story that's far from over.
Welcome to the Sky at Night.
If there is life in outer space, if there are intelligent beings up there trying to contact us, then their messages will be picked up here, probably before anywhere else on Earth.
In 1966, the BBC sent Alan Whicker to get up close and personal with a truly astronomical engineering marvel.
To hear the voices, you need a big ear. And this is the biggest ear on Earth. It's the size of 10 football fields. It can eavesdrop on the stars.
The Arecibo radio telescope was the largest of its kind for more than 5 decades. Sensitive enough to pick up the faintest of signals from distant galaxies, it symbolised humanity's quest to answer one of the biggest questions in science. A quest the BBC has reported on from the start.
Is man unique? Is he alone in the universe? Is he the Lord of creation fashioned by God in his own image and likeness? Or is the universe populated by countless millions of creatures incredibly more intelligent than man? Tonight, in our search for an answer to these questions, we look beyond our planet Earth, beyond our immediate neighbour, the Moon, beyond our entire solar system to the further points of our galaxy, and on beyond the billions of trillions of other stars that abound in the infinity of space. Since the dawn of history, man has looked up at the night sky and wondered if intelligent life might exist on other worlds besides his own. As astronomy developed, the concept of the existence of life on other worlds began to acquire some scientific basis. Many of the early Greek philosophers taught that our Earth was not the sole dwelling place of intelligent life. This is not a science fiction program, but one in which scientists speculate and state their case seriously.
Nature doesn't do things in ones and twos. She's not mean. There are millions of planets, millions of stars and millions of galaxies, and very likely up there, millions of other different kinds of intelligent creature.
Some of the earliest archive we've unearthed from the vaults show that back in the 1960s, scientists took the search for ET very seriously.
A leading American astronomer who's played a major role in studying the possibility of intelligent life existing elsewhere in the universe is Dr. Carl Sagan.
I and a few of my colleagues have spent a fair amount of time trying to find some evidence for intelligent life on Earth. By and large, we've been unsuccessful. Let me explain. Here are some photographs of the planet Earth taken by the American meteorological satellite ATS-1. The white stuff is clouds, the dark stuff is the surface of the Earth, in this case the Pacific Ocean. And as you see, there's no sign of life. Now, here's a photograph of the British Isles. This is a fairly rare photograph, rare because the British Isles are largely cloud-free. Now, prolonged scrutiny of this photograph reveals no sign of life. Somewhere in this picture, I've forgotten just where, is Paris. Paris doesn't show up because you can't see Paris at this sort of resolution. So, despite all our feelings that man has profoundly remade the surface of the Earth, we see that at least at this kind of resolution, the Earth is essentially the same as it was hundreds of millions of years ago before man or his ancestors ever evolved.
It's sobering to comprehend just how primitive the technology was back then. And if these were some of our best images of Earth, then our pictures of Mars were even less clear. So you can understand why even a perfectly rational astronomer thought there might be, well, if not little green men exactly, then little green somethings there at least.
Good evening. We've just had some amazing photographs sent back by the American probe to Mars, Mariner 6. You can see there some of the dark areas, which may be vegetation. Well, the question is, of course, are these dark areas due to organic matter, vegetation if you like, or are they not? Now, what about this all-important question of life on Mars? Do you think that these dark areas are due to anything organic? What do you think about it?
Primitive life there may be. I don't even think so. Intelligent life, certainly not.
So, in other words, you rather think that Mars is a dead planet?
Absolutely dead as a dodo.
Well, I suppose one of these things we're going to find out fairly soon.
The pictures taken by Mariner were shown on television sets across the world and revealed a barren landscape where the prospects for advanced life were slim. But they help promote an incredible thought that soon gripped the public. If we can send spacecraft to other planets, then maybe aliens could send their spacecraft to the Earth.
What are flying saucers, unidentified flying objects, UFOs? Some people say they've seen them. Animal lover Joe Simonton, ex-professional boxer, deputy sheriff, Wisconsin. He showed
Dear Sir, the planet Venus is inhabited with beings who look just like ourselves. No doubt you can't see this, not with all the education you may possess, for when one's educated, things become complicated, and that simplicity is non-existable. Dear Sir, one evening, many years ago in Glasgow, I noticed a series of round balls travelling round 3 walls of a room. Whatever was causing the images, about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, I looked and could discover nothing. Then I noticed that stars in the sky were fading, and that as they faded, my balls disappeared. Stars were round. How is it that everyone thinks them pointed? Well, those are some of the many thousands of letters that I've had since I started going on the air and talking about astronomy, which is a good many years ago now.
Despite the scepticism of the scientific community, the public grew ever eager for such yarns. So, the BBC dispatched the ever-gallant Patrick Moore to see what all the fuss was about.
Another example of a man who interprets the evidence as he sees it is Mr. Arthur Shuttleworth of the Warminster Journal. He believes that we are being visited by alien beings and that one focal point of saucer activity is Cradle Hill outside Warminster town.
Well, this is the first time I've been on Cradle Hill. It's certainly a very bleak kind of spot. Is this one of your most favourable observing sites?
This is the best we found, Patrick, of all the high points around here. This is the most productive.
Well, it's a lovely evening at the moment. I can see the moon shining at us from up there, so we'll come back here this evening and just hope for the best.
I hope so, yes. Of course, it's not as large as the normal type we get, but that we would definitely classify as UFO. He'll come back. Yes, he will. He will come back.
I think with a great respect, I think he was a satellite.
Well,
it's probably Echo. Probably Echo.
Oh, well.
I thought
that's two satellites in 2 minutes.
Yes, we can see hundreds of them.
I'm never going to believe in flying saucers, but I do realize how much poorer the world would be without these people of independent thought. But as for myself, I'm going to remain a cosy little conventionalist for the rest of my life, and I know it. But I may well be missing something. I wonder.
Despite explanations ranging from weather balloons to flying geese, not all astronomers shared Patrick's scepticism.
Astronomer Alan Hynek doesn't agree with the scientists who've written off unidentified flying objects as a nonsense problem without a meaningful solution.
In each age, there are certain things that are, you might say, admitted onto the playing field of science, and that varies with each age. And there were times certainly when hypnotism wasn't admitted on the playing field of science, or circulation of the blood, or bacterial cause of disease. All these things were laughed at.
Hynek is a man of considerable scientific reputation. After all, he designed the American satellite tracking system. But even he wasn't immune from the ridicule shown to anyone interested in the unexplained.
A colleague will say, well, what are you making with this nonsense for? I said, well, how do you dare talk about these things if you haven't read the data, if you are not acquainted with the data? This is not scientific. I think myself that UFOs represent new empirical observations. And I simply cannot hold, after these 20 years' experience, that all UFO reports can be explained as misperceptions, misidentifications, or hallucinations.
For Patrick, though, the more we learned, the less likely it seemed we had aliens for neighbours.
Good evening. During the last few years, we've had our first close-range pictures from other worlds. The moon has been reached. It's a fascinating place, but it's lifeless. Mars has been found to have giant volcanoes on its surface, but it isn't now generally thought that those famous dark areas are due to vegetation. Venus is intolerably hot, and Mercury, well, it isn't very friendly. It's crater-scarred and almost without atmosphere. In fact, our searches haven't shown us one thing for which we've been very carefully looking: evidence of life beyond the Earth. So are we alone in the universe? Nowadays, we have a brand new word: exobiology, the study of unfamiliar life forms. Undoubtedly, the leading exobiologist is Dr. Carl Sagan. Well, Dr. Sagan found time to come into a BBC studio, and we were delighted to see him. And I began by asking him a vital question. Was he sure that extraterrestrial civilizations must exist?
Not very sure at all. The situation seems to be this. We have a range of information on other planetary systems, on the possibility of the origin of life, on the evolutionary process, and they all seem to suggest that what we have in this neck of the galactic woods is not at all unusual, that life is a common phenomenon. But that's very different from being sure about it. And the only way that we can determine the answer to this question is experimentally. And it's our remarkable good fortune to be alive at a time when such experiments are possible. And there are essentially two methods which are relevant. One is the landing of spacecraft on neighboring planets such as Mars to search out for life, even simple, so-called simple forms of life there. And the other is to employ large radio telescopes to listen for possible signals being sent our way by civilizations on planets of other stars. In fact, using existing radio technology on the Earth, we could send the equivalent of a 100-word telegram for something like £1. But the chance of success in picking up messages directed our way depends in large part on how serious we are at investigating such possible signals. And it's clear that we should not be disappointed at not having detected such signals yet when we haven't made an appropriately serious effort to find them. But I think that's going to come.
You would agree, wouldn't you, that in our own particular solar system there's no other civilization apart from ours?
I think that's very likely. If they're even a little behind us on the cosmic time scale, they're not civilized, and if they're just a little ahead of us on the cosmic time scale, we would have clear evidence of their presence.
Well, I'm fascinated that you don't entirely discount any kind of life on Mars. If it is any life there, what form do you think it takes?
Nobody knows. Any more than if we lived on Mars and examined the Earth through a large telescope, we could deduce beings as strange-looking as we on the Earth.
Although the Mariner mission showed a desolate Mars, they did provide evidence of a more temperate, watery past. And as the first of the Viking probes approached for a closer look in 1976, the BBC's James Burke remained optimistic about what they might find.
Whatever they do see when the cameras first look out across the plains of Mars, the presence of anything living may have to do with other reasons than the availability of liquid water. One, because significant amounts of liquid water are highly unlikely, not to say virtually out of the question. Two, whatever has survived will have to cope with extremely rigorous conditions. High levels of lethal ultraviolet radiation from the sun and a temperature range from 80 degrees Fahrenheit at midsummer noon down to as low as minus 200 in the middle of the winter night. So if life has survived on Mars, it's either because it's dormant or because it's evolved to suit the environment, which is why the Viking cameras might just catch a glimpse of something like this. Looking rather like a bit of polished stone, in fact, the top end of a plant that could live on Mars. This section here, a translucent dome made by the plant out of the silicon elements in this soil, would act as a filter to protect it against the ultraviolet radiation, while at the same time letting through the visible sunlight necessary for the photosynthesis process. And that process would work in this area here, aided by these silicon light receptors. As for the water, well, if the theories about Mars are right, the water lies locked, frozen in permafrost layers below the surface, tapped by the plant roots. Carrying nodules like these, using some kind of heat mechanism, perhaps a warm fluid circulating within the plant, to melt the permafrost. As far as we know, the entire surface of Mars could be littered with plants like this.
For centuries, humans had peered at the planets and wondered if they might be populated by intelligent beings. But while the space age garnered huge media attention and stirred the imagination of the public, it was a disappointment for alien hunters. The Viking probes represented what seemed to be a last chance to find life on Mars. When they landed, they found nothing. Just a harsh, sterile environment with little hope for life. But dreams of aliens out there somewhere didn't go away. And even the BBC's Horizon programme reported on some quite bizarre claims. The author Erich von Daniken didn't believe our ancestors were capable of creating the incredible monuments of their civilizations. He thought they had help from aliens.
One startling hypothesis about man's past begins with an alien spacecraft approaching Earth. Man was still primitive and uncivilized. In terror and wonder, he watched the descent of the fiery gods from heaven. The spacecraft landed and the astronauts walked on Earth. They performed great deeds and departed, and to this day the tale of their coming is related in ancient legends found throughout the globe. 9 years ago, this remarkable thesis created a sensational worldwide bestseller. It drew a completely new picture of man's prehistory. The book was Chariots of the Gods, written by the Swiss author Erich von Daniken.
I try to prove that this planet has been visited by beings from outer space several times in antiquity. Second, I say that one of these first visits was the reason why Homo sapiens has become intelligent. So they made with our forefathers a kind of artificial mutation. And finally, these visits from outer space have gone into old religions, into mythology, and even, at some cases, into archaeological artifacts.
Could these prehistoric cave paintings be portraits of ancient astronauts? Do these statues depict spacesuits? And does this carving from Mexico show a space traveler crouched in his rocket? Another startling interpretation is given to the mysterious lines on the Nazca Desert in Peru. Von Daniken writes,
"You can make out gigantic lines, laid out geometrically, some of which run parallel to each other while others intersect. The archaeologists call them Inca roads, a preposterous idea. Seen from the air, the clear-cut impression they made on me was that of an airfield."
In fact, no modern archaeologist claims the lines are roads. The only real road on the desert is the Pan American Highway. And as the lines often run for miles, cross hills and go over the edges of cliffs, it's a strange pattern for a spaceport. But there is another explanation of the lines. It comes from someone who has spent a lifetime studying them. Maria Riker has walked almost every foot of the Nazca Desert, measuring and calibrating the shapes in the sand. Some of them pointed to the place where the sun set at the summer or winter solstice, the time when the seasons change. There are many such lines, and they've led to the interpretation of the Nazca Plain as a gigantic astronomical calendar. So, does one accept von Daniken's interpretations? Or those of someone like Maria Riker, who has studied the lines for years?
We are thinking beings. We are interested and excited in understanding how the world is put together. We seek out the extraordinary. And if you think of these claims, if only they were true, they would be amazingly interesting, that we have been visited by beings from elsewhere who not only have created our civilization for us, but mated with human beings. That it's, in my view, much more likely to successfully mate with a petunia than an extraterrestrial. But certainly there is a degree of fascination if such accounts were true.
Chariots of the Gods was an undoubted bestseller when it was released, but it seems completely antiquated in its tone and approach today. And by this point, Patrick has certainly changed his tune about life on Mars too, as discussed here with his friend Michael Benteen.
You know, I was reading the other day about the Gutzman Prize of December 1900, and this was really priceless, I think. It was a perfectly serious thing, 100,000 francs to be given to the first man to establish communication with another world, except Mars, because that was regarded as being too easy.
60 million miles away, it's too easy.
Of course, that is above all the planet beloved of the storytellers. I wonder why, Michael. I suppose it's because it's less unlike the Earth than any other.
I think also a lot's got to do with the discovery of the canali by Schiaparelli.
I'm rather sorry about them. Schiaparelli drew them, Percival Lowell drew them. Well, I've used his telescope and I can't see any canals, and I think we know now that they are simply tricks of the eye, which is really rather disappointing. You know, any time before 1965, when Mariner 4 went past the planet, I would have been very confident that there was quite a lot of vegetation there, and Viking has shown us quite differently.
It wasn't only Patrick who had his dreams dashed by Viking. Legendary science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke also felt the sting.
Yes, Mars has been a bit of a disappointment, but I don't think we should write off Mars, even now. Because if there's never been any life on Mars, that's a very surprising fact, because it looks as though Mars may have been quite benign a few million years ago, or a few billion years ago.
But I wonder whether life had time to evolve there before conditions became impossible.
It begins to look as though life can evolve very rapidly if conditions are at all favourable. When you consider the incredible variety of life on this Earth, it's obviously impossible to speculate usefully about life on any other planet. I mean, who could have imagined the giraffe, the giant squid, the whale, or indeed, if you take a dispassionate viewpoint, us? Since on this one planet, in a relatively uniform environment, nature has done such fantastic things, and on planets that are very much hotter or very much colder or have different chemical constituents, then life could take almost any imaginable form.
perfectly true. And I just wonder, you know, whether some of these more bizarre life forms that must exist here and there would be recognizable to us. What do you think?
It's quite possible that they might be totally unrecognizable. Of course, some of them might even be what we would call spiritual. It might be patterns of energy or even patterns of light, not necessarily physical bodies at all. I know this is going really far into speculation. I suspect that most really advanced intelligences, though, will be electronic, mechanical, in other words, the successors of our computers. In fact, I think what we're doing now is to build our own successors.
The idea of intelligent patterns of light or our own robot successors remains science fiction, for now. And the story of horny aliens interfering with human evolution is dismissed by most sensible scientists. However, another far-fetched sounding theory had surprisingly heavyweight support.
It was put forward in the early years of our own century by a Swedish scientist and Nobel Prize winner named Svante Arrhenius. And Arrhenius suggested that life was brought to the Earth by means of a meteorite. And this became known as the panspermia theory.
Arrhenius's ideas fell into disfavor because biologists found that life was rather complicated, and they thought, well, it's so complicated that it couldn't have happened out in space. We're going still further. We're saying life is so exceedingly complicated that it couldn't have happened on the Earth, that one needs all the resources of the universe to put, or of our galaxy, stars, and so forth, to put life together. That is why we are returning to Arrhenius. We think of the Earth not as a place where life originated, but as a maintenance station for life, as a place where, when it was added here, it was able to survive and continue. We think it was added in the form of small components, which we call viruses and bacteria, and that they were assembled into what we call our genetic material that's suited for building larger creatures such as ourselves.
I think it's true to say, isn't it, that if your theory is correct, life not only may be spread throughout the universe, it must be.
That is the implication. I think the important word you used there was must. It must be every place where there is what I called a maintenance station, we're going to find life. And I would rather think that Mars at one time might have been a maintenance station whilst its waters were flowing. But surely there must be many places where this has happened. Do you have an idea of the numbers?
The numbers must be very favourable, Fred, isn't it? Yeah. There are billions of stars in the galaxy which are probably very similar to the Sun, and very similar to the extent of being able to support planetary systems. So it would really be very surprising if life is not, if the galaxy is not just teeming with life.
And intelligent life too.
I would have thought so, yeah.
Well then, this brings us on to this question that everybody's asking. What about possible contact with other intelligent beings? Do you think this is a possibility?
As long as one isn't too greedy about the answer, yes. It isn't something that's going to happen overnight or perhaps even in a lifetime. But it's going to happen, I think. I would take a bet that it's going to happen.
How do you think it may be done? Radio communication first?
At the moment, that looks the best bet.
But there's a problem. Space is big, really big. And the stars are really far away.
The nearest stars which are anything like the Sun are Taur Cetus and Epsilon Eridani. And even those two stars are over 11 light years away. That means that a radio wave, which travels at the same speed of light, would take 11 years to get there and another 11 to get back. So even sending messages would be extremely difficult. One man who's suitably cautious is Professor Sir Bernard Lovell. He, of course, is the great pioneer of radio astronomy. Well, a few days ago, I went to Jojo Bank, and I began by asking Sir Bernard whether he thought it would ever be possible to make contact with other intelligences.
I would say it was extremely unlikely. It's, of course, like many other people with big telescopes, we've been pressed to attempt communication with any civilized beings which might exist around the nearest stars. But I've always resisted that purely on probability grounds that one can't spend the time on such an improbable exercise. And with the best that we could do with modern technology on Earth, one could only establish communication with the stars within 10 or 20 light years of the solar system, a negligible part of the Milky Way, an insignificant part of the universe. And the chances of any intelligent beings being there are so remote that I simply don't think it's worthwhile. One can never exclude the possibility of accident. After all, a lot of the discoveries during the last 20 years in astronomy have been made purely by accident. But I think the answer really is that any rational judgment would say that it's going to be impossible to establish communication. But being a scientist and having lived through a most remarkable epoch of scientific history, I would be reluctant to say no, never.
Well, admittedly, the chances are very slim, but they're not absolutely nil.
Despite the improbability of an interplanetary chat line, let alone an interstellar visitor, UFO sightings remained a mainstay of television reports.
Caught it.
And so Patrick reunited with his old pal Michael Bentine to try and put the matter to bed.
When these things were first reported, they were always known as flying saucers. I'm not quite sure when they changed over to UFO, but a flying saucer it could be. A friend of mine, Alexander Helm, took a wonderful saucer photograph. And look at this slide. Isn't it magnificent?
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Isn't it splendid? Until you turn it upside down.
It's a puddle.
It is a puddle of water, and of course the sky and the water appear to be interchanged. But the point there, surely, is that if you have that picture and you don't know which way up it goes, and you look at it without knowing, it could quite easily pass as a really good saucer picture.
Oh, absolutely valid.
If saucers were spaceships, which I don't believe for one moment, they must come from distances of millions of miles, and even going at the speed of light, they take years to do it. And although, I say again, I'm the most profound skeptic about the spacecraft theory, there's a lot we don't know.
Yes, I agree.
You know, science fiction's got an uncanny habit of turning into science fact, and things are happening now that would have been sheer science fiction only a few years ago. Well, when you think that...
Well, Fred, what do you think of the planet Earth? To be frank, old man, not very much. Neither do I. Have you seen any sign of intelligent life? Not a flicker.
As the 80s kicked off, the frivolity and strangeness of some of the previous decade's coverage started to shift towards a more serious approach. Attention turned to thinking seriously about the likelihood of finding intelligent life. Firstly, by calculating how many alien civilizations might be advanced enough to communicate with us.
It was radio astronomer Frank Drake who first tried to do so in a methodical way. He devised an equation for the number of civilizations in our galaxy which we might detect by radio. The equation starts with the rate of star formation, then the fraction of those stars which have planetary systems, and the number of habitable planets in each system. And as if that's not enough, they still have to estimate the fraction of habitable sites in which first life evolves and then intelligence, and the fraction in which the intelligent beings become both technological and communicative.
This combination of factors, multiplied together then, gives us the rate of production of new communicative civilizations in our galaxy. Now, although the civilizations are being produced at all times, they flash upon the scene, are visible for some time, and then leave. Not because they've been destroyed, probably because they have become so sophisticated that we can no longer detect them. So, if we multiply the rate of entry by the length of time they stay, we get the steady state population.
Bother, I played it with mine, and it just causes arguments. In fact, since Drake first proposed his equation in 1961, there have been a broad range of predictions.
Now, in some sets of numbers which have become canonical but should be treated very cautiously, big N turns out to be large, something like 1 million.
My guess, that's the right word to use, is that N is about 10,000 in our galaxy.
In the Milky Way galaxy itself, well, it would be of the order of 1/10,000th, which means you'd have to search 10,000 galaxies to find one.
While the hunt for aliens among the stars continued to be taken seriously, the same could no longer be said for the UFO spotters.
If there are creatures from another world, where would they come to first?
To Rochdale, that's where. In the last few years, a large number of sincere, genuine people have reported seeing strange, cylinder-like objects in the sky. And many increasingly believe that aliens from outer space have selected Rochdale for their first contact with the planet Earth and the human race.
Mike Sachs is a local tailor and claims to have seen something not quite right on the moors.
What did I say up here? I saw something that I can't equate with anything that is flying on the Earth at this present time. It looked like what in common terminology is called a UFO, an unidentified flying object. The sound was a whirring, whining howl, like a... That was the sound it made. After the event, then we thought, what if it hadn't have stopped descending? We'd have been mush underneath it, quite honestly.
You've drawn a picture of what it looked like, haven't you? Can I just have a look at it so we can
pleasure.
Get an indication? So that's the object there, is it?
That is the object.
Yeah. Are you a particularly gullible person, or were you cynical about this kind of thing before you saw it?
Let's put it this way: any man who's not open-minded is a fool.
And while accounts of alien encounters were still popular,
the light was coming at me, it was extremely bright. The inside of the car lit up. I can remember that.
It was hovering up here, just below the tops of the trees, and it was about 20-25 feet in diameter.
the concern was that they were diverting focus away from genuine scientific progress.
Undoubtedly, a few sightings are difficult to explain. Yet, ironically, the search for an extraterrestrial explanation may be masking something of importance.
The pity is that there could indeed be something extraordinary masquerading behind UFO reports. Now, when I say extraordinary, I mean something perhaps of genuine interest to science, such as these earthquake lights or ball lightning or perhaps some kind of insect manifestations. And the pity is that such perhaps genuinely interesting phenomena are being glossed over and camouflaged by popular misperceptions about UFOs.
Resulting in scientists making no bones about where they stood on the matter.
The idea that they might visit here, that they might be able to solve all of the problems, war, disease, economic problems, is really sort of the adult equivalent of Santa Claus, who brings good things for good little girls and boys. So, in my opinion, the belief in UFOs will persist as long as there are people on this earth, but it is a myth.
Nevertheless, Patrick was regularly invited onto other programs to discuss the possibility of finding alien life in our own cosmic backyard.
One of the other great, often asked and answered questions about the solar system is, on all these little planets here, are there little men scampering around like us?
I very much fear not, because, you see, you've got to have the right kind of conditions, and they just don't apply. I mean, consider the planet Venus, which is a lovely-looking thing in the sky, about the same size as the Earth, closer to the sun than we are. But when you analyse the atmosphere, you find that the atmosphere is made up chiefly of carbon dioxide. The surface temperature is about 900 degrees. The surface pressure is about 90 times the pressure in this studio now, and the clouds are made of sulfuric acid. So if you go to Venus and step outside your spacecraft, you will immediately be fried, poisoned, squashed and corroded.
And he continued to respond to even the more outlandish claims with his trademark graciousness and good humour.
When Mr. Moore, Patrick, says, of course, that there is no life, there can be no life on Venus, what he is saying is that we cannot live on Venus. But
well, that seems a fair point.
But yes, if you have the arrogant assumption, excuse me,
by all means,
that many scientists hold that this is the greatest form of life and there can be nothing else, adapted to another environment that perhaps the physical eye cannot see, perhaps physics, as we know it on this Earth, is not capable of discerning. Now, that's the kind of life form that we believe in.
Tell us about the Martians.
Monocles.
Let's hear about the
like
Martians.
the monocle. So don't ridicule other people.
Let's hear about
the
the
Martians. Are, in our belief, advanced people.
What do they look like?
They are, when they are seen,
yes,
we believe that they, it's a marvellous character. They are...
It's a good question, too.
I'm asking you what
humanoid,
they look like.
but taller than us. About perhaps possibly 7 feet in height. And by the way, they have been sighted.
Oh, yes.
And centuries ago.
Oh, yes.
And we believe that their message is a very, very serious one.
All right, one final question. Is there any danger of finding intelligent life on Earth?
Not with a science like the one we're using now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Over the next decade, the BBC's interest in the search for alien life declined.
The radio telescopes listening out for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence had come up with nothing. And the results from interplanetary probes weren't much better.
There weren't even any episodes of The Sky at Night dedicated to the topic.
But one hope remained. If we could find where in the galaxy aliens might live, then we'd have a better chance of tracking them down.
And in 1995, a team of researchers had been studying the star 51 Pegasi, or 51 Peg.
They were looking for a telltale wobble that might indicate the existence of an orbiting exoplanet, a planet outside of our own solar system.
51 Peg was certainly strange. At first it was just another star on the list, but a few months into the search, the Swiss team noticed that there was something different about it. When Didier Queloz set his computer software to work on the data, the analysis suggested 51 Peg was changing speed.
In fact,
Every visit to the observatory gave them more data, and eventually a pattern emerged. When they looked at the graph as a whole, it showed a wobble.
After months of observations, they had all the proof they needed. And in October 1995, announced their discovery. The team had found the first planet outside of our solar system, orbiting a sun-like star.
the first reaction was enthusiastic, because at that time people thought that it was too difficult to find planets. And then we bring this news and we say, we can find them. And then people say, all right, that's nice, we can find them, then we have to try.
Alas, the planet that they had discovered was a scorching hot gas giant, an unlikely prospect for life. But this monumental achievement for science made headlines around the world and spurred on the planet hunters in their search for a distant Earth.
And as the 21st century dawned, it wasn't the only big story that the BBC followed. Efforts were ramping up to revisit the place where hopes of finding alien life had previously been dashed. In 2006, I caught up with one such mission. What made us rethink our ideas about life on Mars?
There now appears to be water everywhere. Okay, not liquid water as we know, but certainly ice. It might be possible that below the surface, actually if there's a local heat source, for example, that water might exist as a liquid. So, that's one of the most important prerequisites. So that's one factor. The other are the so-called extremophiles. We find in the most extreme of environments, in extremely acidic, extremely alkaline conditions, in high radiation environments, we're realizing that life is much, much tougher than we'd ever realise. So perhaps Mars is not such an aggressive environment for life to have developed.
And if it developed, what happened to it?
Now, clearly, because of the ultraviolet, also the cosmic radiation, the surface is sterile. But is it not possible that life, if it existed in a simple form, might have evolved a mechanism to survive the changing environment and gone below the surface? In fact, the models show that you don't have to go very far below the surface to be shielded from the UV and the cosmic rays. In fact, and this is one of the reasons why ExoMars aims to drill down below the surface for the first time.
Well, is there life on Mars? Brian, what do you think?
I would love to think there is. I'm sure we all would.
And as the Sky at Night celebrated its 50th birthday, the potential for life on Mars was a popular topic of debate amongst astronomers and rock stars alike.
Well, Chris, what do you think about it?
There's no life on the surface. There aren't any Martians walking around, but under the soil there's an awful lot of water. So maybe, just maybe, we'd get primitive life down there.
I think we do. After all, Mars is not too unlike the Earth, and I'm sure there is a certain amount of life on Mars.
Tell you what, guys, I'll lay you odds of 1,000,000 to 1 that they don't find it inside 50 years.
Right. There's a pound.
You're on.
By now, we'd been searching the skies for decades. But we still hadn't found any evidence proving life wasn't confined solely to Earth.
Then, in 2015, new data from the Kepler Space Telescope caused a sensation around the globe, and Chris was part of the team.
We been running a project for the last few years called Planet Hunters, which has invited hundreds of thousands of people to go online and to look through this data from Kepler and try and find planets. And we found planets, but a few of the volunteers pointed us to this one particular star which is behaving really oddly. This is its brightness over the course of about 3 or 4 years. And usually most of the time it's fairly stable, but there are these dips, just like you'd expect if there was a planet. But the dips happen randomly. Some of them are huge, so at one point something blocks out 20% of the star's light. That's way too much for this to be a normal planet, and the fact that they're irregular means that this can't be something on a circular orbit that blocks out the star's light again and again and again. Something really odd is going on here. The obvious question is, what's blocking the light from the star? The star was named Tabby's star, after the lead investigator, Tabitha Bowen. One astonishing suggestion was that it might be a Dyson sphere, an enormous artificial structure surrounding the star, providing almost limitless energy for an advanced civilization. So cool.
It looked like a prime spot to search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And 2 years later, the search for intelligent life in the universe has so far been in vain.
But the hunt for another Earth among the stars continued.
To date, nearly 4,500 exoplanets have been confirmed, several of which are Earth-like planets within their stars' habitable zones.
But as no telescope is powerful enough to view their surface detail, then how could we hope to find signs of alien life on them? Biologist Adam Rutherford investigated.
Life is a chemical reaction, a process of extracting energy from the environment and using it to sustain itself. A process we call metabolism. And luckily, metabolism leaves a trail of evidence behind it. In fact, the oxygen that fills our atmosphere was created by life. So, forget about radio signals from ET. If we really want to find signs of life, we should be looking at the atmospheres of exoplanets. And it is possible to do this by analysing light that passes through the atmospheres of distant planets to reveal what they're made of. To understand what signs we should look out for, I'm meeting Louisa Preston. If we were to look at the Earth from space, would we be able to tell that there is life on Earth?
Yes, we'd be able to see oxygen, be able to see methane, carbon dioxide.
How do we then transfer that into looking for life in exoplanets, in other planets?
Well, because we know that the atmosphere can harbour these different types of molecules that life creates, we can look for exactly the same thing when we look at exoplanets. But we just have to figure out what the exact right molecules are. So oxygen is definitely a biosignature that we would look for on another planet. Problem is, it can be made from non-biological ways. Same with methane.
So is it that we're looking for a particular combination of those gases in the atmosphere, so the right amount of methane, the right amount of oxygen?
It's more a disequilibrium idea. So there could be a bit of oxygen, there could be a bit of methane. We want to see an excessive amount because oxygen and methane are very short-lived. They can degrade very quickly, react with other products, react with each other. But if there's life, it will keep pumping it into the atmosphere, so you'll see more of it than you would expect. And the best thing is to find them together.
Now, these are signatures of simple life. What about us? What should we be looking for if we were looking for intelligent life?
Sadly, we'll be looking for pollutants. So we all hear about CFCs and the hole in the ozone layer. They are really long-lived, and they also cannot be created naturally. They are created by us and by intelligent life. So when we look at other atmospheres, if we see CFCs in their atmospheres, then we know there's some kind of a technological civilization on that planet.
Finding such a biosignature would be sensational. And as we wait for the completion of telescopes powerful enough to study the atmospheres of distant worlds, last year the Sky at Night hotline rang and the show was given a real exclusive.
We're having to be incredibly secret. So what is this top secret groundbreaking discovery? Well, if you haven't heard, the team claim that they found what could be the signs of life on Venus. I can't believe I get to say that to camera, but the team think they found what could be the signs of life on Venus. Abnormal levels of phosphine, a potential biosignature, had been detected in the planet's atmosphere. This was very unexpected.
We know there was probably a runaway greenhouse effect on Venus hundreds of millions or even billions of years ago, and as a result of that, the surface is now incredibly hot. But the clouds, and this was realized, I think, in the 1960s by Carl Sagan, when you go really high up, so about 50 kilometers up, the pressure in the clouds is like it is at the surface of the Earth, and the temperature is actually like 20 or 30 centigrade, so it's really quite habitable. The thinking behind this is perhaps Venus was habitable much like the Earth, but a long time ago, billions of years ago. As this runaway greenhouse effect happened, some of the smaller life was able to float up into the sky, essentially, and survive and develop new ways of living up there.
Astronomers have found weird things before and said maybe this might be a sign of life. In this case, obviously it's not definitive, but you said, okay, this is an experiment. If we find this, it might well be a biosignature. We'll look for it, and we found it.
We've done exactly what you're supposed to do in science, predicted a thing, gone out and looked for the thing. The surprise was finding the thing.
Is there life on Venus? That's what I want to know. I think some people will say there cannot be life on Venus, and therefore there's something wrong with the result. I think others will say, well, maybe there is life there, but it must be something very strange. And if it's something very strange, that's really exciting, and so we should go there and find out.
As astronomers argue over phosphine, and we wait for newly announced missions to examine the clouds of Venus further, Maggie also recently caught up with Louisa Preston to find out about the latest discoveries on Mars.
Mars is a very popular world. We've got one mission there looking for habitable environments at the moment. We've got Perseverance on the way. We've got the ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover going in 2022, and they're all looking for signatures that life may once, maybe even now, but probably more likely once lived on Mars.
Perseverance will land on Mars in 2021. How's it going to go about looking for signs of life?
What it's going to do is it's going to study different rocks and minerals that it finds in Jezero crater where it lands, that we know are very good at preserving the biosignatures of life. The other thing that Perseverance is going to be doing is preparing for Mars sample return. So it's going to be collecting samples in the different locations it's going to and leaving them all packaged up and ready for a future mission to come and pick them up and bring them back to Earth. And then we can really attack them with all our really good instruments that can't be quite miniaturized for a rover yet.
We've been sending a lot of probes to Mars. We've been searching for a long time, but we haven't discovered anything yet. What does that tell us?
I think it tells us that life isn't sitting on the surface waiting to be found. So what we want to do is look under the surface of Mars, and that's something that most of our rovers so far haven't been able to really do to a great depth. And that's what the ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover is going to do. She's going to be able to drill 2 meters into the surface, and hopefully, if there's anything hiding down there, we'll be able to find it.
So if we do find something, what would be the key indicators that tells us that there is life on Mars or there was life on Mars?
Well, I mean, if we're really honest, a bone or something wiggly looking, I think what everyone would love to see. But in all honesty, we all find a molecule or a fat or an amino acid or something that goes into making a protein. It will be a chemical signature, which won't look very pretty, but it will definitely prove that life was once there.
So if we did find life, what effect do you think you'd have on humans across the world?
I think to know we're not alone and to know that life isn't just this unique thing, it's everywhere, I think would be absolutely fundamental. Scientifically, I think it would be incredibly interesting. We don't really know how we came to be. All the history of how life started on the Earth has been erased because our planet is so geologically active. So that's why we like to look at Mars, because it's all preserved there, because it hasn't had the same geological processes. So if we found life there, it could fill in all the gaps for us and maybe help us understand so much more about where we came from.
It's not just the planets we're looking at to find life in our solar system. The moons of the gas giants are also an exciting proposition. Missions are being planned right now to send extraordinary spacecraft to explore them.
From the first interplanetary probes to the spacecraft of the future, we have continued to follow the twists and turns of this enthralling cosmic treasure hunt.
From scouring the surface of our celestial neighbours in the hope of photographing a Martian or two,
to scanning on the off chance of picking up an interplanetary phone call.
and peering through the clouds of distant worlds, hoping to glimpse signs of life.
Through all the highs and the lows.
The close calls and never weres.
The BBC has been there to document every step along the way.
Whilst we've had to say goodbye to some old friends, our commitment to following the search has endured.
As the science has improved, our hopes for shaking hands with little green men may have declined. But as we continue to seek out life in our own solar system and beyond, who knows where the next big story might lead.
Whether we're ever going to prove the existence of other beings remains to be seen. One day, possibly we will, but I'm afraid the time is not yet. All I will maintain is that if our present scientific evidence is to be believed, all the evidence is that we are not alone in the universe, and there must be many inhabited planets all around the galaxy, and in other galaxies too. But whether we'll ever prove it for certain is something that I simply don't know. We've got to wait and see. And there, I think, we've got to leave this fascinating problem and just hope that one day more information will come to hand. Good night.
Well, I have to say, Patrick did win, because we actually did find bacterial life on Mars. So, Patrick, here's your newly minted £1 million coin. With inflation, it'll just about buy you a Mars bar, I should think.
I'd far prefer a brandy if I could drink one in this virtual state.
Continue to reach beyond the horizon to explore the unusual and the beautiful with every episode of Brian Cox's Adventures in Space and Time, streaming now on iPlayer. And learn of the man who plans to take us beyond the horizon with Jill Lepore. Download BBC Sounds for Elon Musk, the evening rocket.